Welcome to part two on our segment related to Roman Republican art. We just finished up talking about panel painting or wall painting and the different styles of Roman wall painting there were. Those styles, obviously, the third and fourth style probably existed during the empirical Rome, but it's just easier to talk about it separately. So, now we're going to be looking at some architecture. Again, before the empire, Rome was ruled by elected officials. It was a democratic system, somewhat in that there were three classes of people. There were patricians, plebeians, and slaves. So the patricians were sort of the elite. The plebeians were like, artisans, farmers, laborers, people who worked, and then slaves. Romans would become very well known for their ingenuity in engineering because they conquered a vast territory. They needed a way to keep cities running with fresh water, with a fresh water supply. They conquered Nimes, an area located in France. Romans came up with and brought technology to make the city more inhabitable and urban. And it created an aqueduct system that brought water 30 miles from outside of the city. Conquered people were more accepting of Roman rule because of these technological advances, because they actually improved, in many cases, their living conditions. So what you're looking at is the Pont du Gard in Nimes, France. This was an enormous structure in scale. The top portion has a channel dug into it that carried and funneled the water. Refer to the principles of the arch is something that is an architectural feature that we're going to be really learning about, and the Romans will really use this idea to expand space in very extravagant ways. These stone blocks were uncemented and held together by gravity. So the placement and sort of the system of the arch sort of allowed for the Romans to really expand space in a new way. This would have been impossible with the post and lintel system that Greeks used for expanding space. Romans also saw the beauty and the rhythm of the repeated arches as well. So this is just using a basic arch. We'll go and look at other structures and how the arch has been, three-dimensionalized. We'll see it as a barrel vault. We'll see two intersecting barrel vaults that form a groin vault, and this will really launch church architecture drastically as well. And so here's the sort of idea of a basic arch and how the stones are placed and how that kind of, spreads the weight out. And, there's usually a keystone that kind of keeps it all in place. And so this structure really demonstrated what efficient problem solvers the Romans were. So while the Greeks were very artistic and really pushed this idea of the human body and this idea of humanism forward, what we'll see with the Romans is that they're fantastic engineers and problem solvers. So again, here's a temple. I told you we weren't going to leave behind that temple architecture that we started to learn about with Greek architecture. Romans incorporated various Greek and Etruscan architectural features in their temple design. So I hope when you look at the facade of this building that you do see an influence of Greek architectural orders. Note the use of the Ionic capitals. Those are the ones with the little scrolls for the capitals. There are some major differences, however. The use of a peristyle colonnade has been replaced with engaged columns. And these are half columns attached to the wall. So this is what these are. So an engaged column is a new architectural term that you need to learn. Like the Etruscans, the Temple Portunus that you're looking at now had one definite entrance using a single axis approach. There's no use of pediment sculpture or decoration in the pediment. And this structure is a combination of both Greek and Etruscan influences. It also has the sort of stairwell that gives you that single axis approach. It has a porch similar to the Etruscan temple. Again, a Greek temple would have had, it wouldn't have had this sort of steep stairwell. It would have just had the platform and the little 3 steps that went all the way around, the stylobite. And then usually the temple that we looked at was a peristyle, where it had a colonnade going all the way around the cella, and then probably a porch to balance the structure. Here, remember in the Etruscan temple, the cella was divided into 3 rooms. Here it's just one big room. So, you might expect to have a sort of a compare and contrast essay between a Greek, Etruscan, and Roman temple in your future. So Romans do become very independent thinkers and will evolve greatly from this hybrid structure that we're looking at now, or this temple structure. The structure is comprised of a mixture of stone and tufa, which is volcanic rock. This substance was much more practical than cut marble on walls. Again, Romans often painted walls to look like marble, as we saw with the first style wall painting that we looked at, and we were looking at some examples in the city of Pompeii. And this again demonstrates how Romans really looked at things from a more practical viewpoint. So they were definitely much more thrifty, I would guess you could say, and much more economical, but still wanted, their buildings to look opulent. And you want to think of, let me go back, you want to think of volcanic rock and tufa, this mixture as sort of a concrete, a type or the beginnings or the precursor to concrete. Roman Republican sculpture is very interesting. So when you look at this image, because it's stone and it's carved, and it is sort of realistic looking, you might think it's Greek, but hopefully you recognize that it's not Greek, because the Greeks would never, ever, ever portray old age this way. Most of the Greek sculptures that we looked at, except for the Hellenistic period, were very much more idealized. So when we look at this image, we seem to be looking at a seemingly wrinkled and toothless older man with sagging jowls. This is the face of a Roman aristocrat that is staring back at us. In the aesthetic parlance of the late Roman Republic, the physical traits of this portrait image are meant to convey seriousness of mind, which was called gravitas, Gravitas, and the virtue of a public, and virtuous, Virtus, of a public career by demonstrating the way in which the subject literally wears the marks of his endeavor. While this representational strategy might seem unusual in the modern world today, what they're talking about, contemporary art today, in the waning days of the Roman Republic, it was an effective means of competing in an ever more complex socio-political arena. So this portrait head, now housed in the Palazzo Orlina in Rome, Italy, comes from Atricoli, ancient Atricolium, and dates to the middle of the 1st century BCE. The name of the individual depicted is unknown, but the portrait is a powerful representation of a male aristocrat with a hooked nose and strong cheekbones. The figure is frontal without any hint of dynamism or emotion. This sets the portrait apart from some of its near contemporaries. The portrait's head is characterized by deep wrinkles, a furrowed brow, and generally an appearance of sagging, sunken skin. And this again is all indicative of what they would term the verestic this sort of truthful style of Roman portraiture. So verism, verism, can be defined as a sort of hyperrealism in sculpture where the naturally occurring features of the subject are exaggerated, often to the point of absurdity. In the case of the Roman Republic portraiture, middle-aged males adopted veristic tendencies in their portraiture to such an extreme that they appear to be extremely aged and worn. This stylistic tendency is influenced both by the tradition of ancestral um, imagines as well as deep-seated respect for family tradition and ancestry. This term, the imagines, Imagines, were essentially death masks of notable ancestors that were kept and displayed by the family. In the case of aristocratic families, these wax masks were used at subsequent funerals so that an actor might portray the deceased ancestor in a sort of familial sort of parade. The ancestral cult in turn influenced a deep connection to family. For late Republican politicians without any famous ancestors, a group famously known as Newmen or hominids novi, and again, these are sort of, I guess, Latin terms. You don't worry too much about them. The need was even more acute, and verism, kind of this type of portraiture, rode in to kind of rescue them. The adoption of such an austere and wizened vision with a tactic to lend familial gravitas to the family who had none, and thus hopefully increase the chances of the aristocrat's success in both politics and business. This jockeying for a position very much characterized the scene at Rome in the waning days of the Roman Republic. Um, and this particular head of a Roman patrician that we're looking at is a reminder that one's public image played a major role in what was a turbulent time in Roman history. So, again, they, instead of trying to idealize youth and health, they really thought that this displayed sort of the endeavors of the accomplishments of the individual and that they were wise, and so they would actually exaggerate the wrinkles and the sags and the circles and stuff under the eyes, because that came across that these individuals were much more that they were very educated, they were accomplished, they were wise, so age was very much associated with wisdom and appreciated by the Romans. So this is an interesting sculpture of a portrait of a Roman general I wanted to show you. It's not on your list of 250 works, but I think it's important because it does show the love that the Romans did have and the appreciation they had of Greek sculpture, especially classical sculpture. So, and when you look at this, you might associate it with Greek. Again, it's not, because um, one, the person is clothed. This a male figure would usually be portrayed as nude, and two, even though the body is very proportioned and exhibits contrapposto and looks very natural, the face is middle aged. So they're sort of combining this idea of rustic portraiture with this sort of idealized body that the Greeks loved. So with this portrait, we do see an idealized body type in line with Greek notions. The artist is showing off the body and has idealized the torso like a Greek god. This reflects power and strength. However, the face is depicted as middle age, symbolizing knowledge and wisdom. With the combination of these two features, we start to see the emergence of an art used for propaganda. This portrait of a Roman general was used to inspire the troops who followed him. This is a deliberate and very specific message to the viewer. And so especially when we get into the empirical Rome, we'll definitely see this use of propaganda portraiture and sculpture really come to fruition. So that is the end of Republican um, Roman art. So in our next summit, we'll be looking at the Empire of Rome and the art and architecture from that period. So stay tuned.